Hello, hello. I'm going to promise some big announcements towards the end of this panel, so please stay seated if you can. Join us for this discussion of the controversies and current context of ESG, investment strategies that take seriously environmental, social, and governance factors. I'm Anthony Berkeley, and I'm with FII Institute. We're a global, independent, nonprofit foundation and think tank based here in Riyadh, opening an office in the US, and will soon to be opening other offices globally. Our mandate is impact on humanity. I'm very privileged to be the leader of our investment team, and we have two other key operating pillars that allow us to advance on that mission. One is the group, which we call Exchange, which organizes these amazing events. And stay tuned. We've got a full series of convenings planned for 2023, beginning early in Q1 in the US. So it'll be a very exciting event. I'm looking forward to that announcement. Last year we convened in London and New York. So stay tuned for similar events around the calendar and hopefully around the globe. Our third team is a think tank, and they provide the depth and substance for our thinking on the foundation and our main priority areas, which are sustainability, health, and education. I'm extremely excited today to be joined in this very current, critical, and timely conversation by market leaders and market makers in ESG, but more broadly in finance itself. Let me do short introductions, and then we're going to cut into the conversation here. To my left is Laura Cha, chairman of the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. To her left is engineer Khalid Abdullah Al Hussan, CEO of the Tadawul Group, Saudi Arabia's stock exchange. Next to him is John Quinn. John Quinn is one of our foremost legal entrepreneurs and experts. He's the founder and senior partner at Quinn Emmanuel. Next to him is Laurie Heinel. Laurie Heinel, Chief Investment Officer at State Street, manages one of the largest and most interesting investment portfolios globally. Next to her is Doug Johnston, partner at Ernst & Young and a key thought leader and partner and ally of the FII Institute in our own work around ESG. Next to him is Rebecca Mingala. Rebecca Mingala is the founder and CEO of Clarity AI, an analytics and data provider key to successful implementations in the ESG space. How did I do, Rebecca?
Great, thank you.
A little better. And then Darren Rovere, our very own Darren Rovere, based here in Dubai at Sustainability Excellence. Many of you probably know him. He's a lead strategy consultant, works with many organizations in this region on ESG and sustainability issues. Well, let's jump right in. Look, it's been a very bad year in the financial markets for many of us, for investors. My wife, by the way, is a financial advisor, so I deal with this every day on the kitchen table. And I tell you what, as bad as it's been in general, it's been even worse for many ESG investors, many of whom exclude the oil and gas majors and are suffering for that. In addition to the financial unpredictability in the markets, we've had an unprecedented level of political, legal, and policy controversy and backlash. I say unprecedented because the ESG community, and I count myself a proud member, has really had a wonderful steady rise into prominence, and we really haven't had a turning point, an inflection point, or a backlash moment. But if you're in New York or London, you are feeling that now. You're seeing your three ESG letters talked about on the talk shows, discussed in a political way that was never true in the past. And I want some help cutting through all this noise. What's real here? What should we really be concerned about? And most importantly, what's the future of ESG? John, let me turn to you. You're actually active right now in litigation around some of these issues. Can you paint a picture? How do you see the current controversy, and what's unprecedented and interesting to you about this year in ESG?
Well, my sense is that ESG is on the defensive right now. After a historic movement of money and investments into ESG, you have to say the pendulum has swung now. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. One is there's still a fundamental view, which is widely held by some people, that ESG has no place in the business world. The focus should be on returns for shareholders. And what is seen as promoting a particular ideology over returns on investment has no business. Now, that view has been discredited a lot in the recent past, but that fundamentally, that's part of the landscape here. The second thing I would say, what has come back, one of the problems that ESG has faced, is it is simply too vague. Most of the discussion about ESG focuses on the E, on the environment, and we'll talk about that for a minute. But how about the S? What is the S that's being promoted? And you hear different things. You hear social justice. You hear about contributions to community. You hear about corporate ethics. Well, whose concept of social justice? I mean, how are we going to measure that? What should we be looking for? Is there a consensus? And of course there isn't. And how about the G? What is the G? To the extent you hear anything about the G, it's kind of like, well, there shouldn't be bribery. There shouldn't be corruption. Well, do we need a concept of, those are illegal. Do we also need a concept of ESG to guide investments in order to say corporations should avoid illegal activities? Another problem, I would say, is the lack of metrics and comparability, including on the part of E, the environment. There are at least 300 purported rating agencies that purport to measure metrics and give scores or grades for investments. And there is very little agreement as to what is being measured and how those things are being weighted. If you look at ratings for credit agencies, they correlate pretty much 98, 99% of the time. There have been efforts to correlate ratings for ESG ratings, investments, and they don't correlate. Maybe half the time do they correlate. So this is a real problem. And then there's a fundamental disconnect. Some people talk about ESG, they're talking about what is the risk to this company or to this portfolio? What risk do they face in the future because of the environment? That sort of risk. What is the risk to the business? Other people talk about ESG in terms of impact investing, wanting to do good. Two entirely different concepts, and in some ways may not overlap, and they may actually be antithetical. So we have, I would say, an utter absence of comparability because there is not a shared understanding of the metrics. So we have, there's an element of subjectivity. And then we've seen ESG become politicized. It's seen by some as the pursuit of a leftist agenda in the business world, and that it has no place, that this is something government should do. Funds shouldn't be doing this. Private equity firms shouldn't be doing this. We look to government to make these decisions. So it's become politicized. We have this phenomenon of governors in the United States saying our pensions funds are not going to invest in any businesses, entities, or funds which say they promote ESG. You have something like 20 attorney generals in states in the United States saying similar things, that the funds, teachers' funds and the like, are not going to invest in anything that purports to be ESG. And then the final factor I think, is the Ukraine war. I mean, we've come to understand that unless we want to end up like Poland or Germany and burning coal or wood, it's going to be necessary to do what? Invest in fossil fuels. That needs to be done. That's being done in this country. It needs to be done. We can't just ignore it. So we're going to need fossil fuels for a long time, and there's a growing recognition of that, which I think has come out particularly because of the Ukraine war. So I think those are the factors that have caused this kind of shift in the sentiment about ESG.
John, thank you. Your realism is appreciated. I don't want to face you in open court. But Doug, let me turn to you for immediate reaction. My other thought is, I've heard a lot of this before and for many years. So what about this context feels to you new and unprecedented, and how do you react to some of that skepticism that we hear from John?
I mean, I value skepticism, and more of us should be skeptics. I think the really important sort of reaction I have is that the problem isn't ESG per se. The problem is how we've all done ESG and what we understand in it. So, I mean, I see ESG as being a title for fundamentally a process that is about an organization understanding how societal issues will impact upon an organization's ability to deliver its strategy, to create value for its shareholders, and to create value for stakeholders. And I think we get it wrong by actually seeing it as a bit of a tech box exercise. You know, you've got to meet these specific criteria. Whereas actually, ESG and what good ESG looks like needs to be judged very much in the local context. Who are the stakeholders you're serving? What are the markets that you're serving? What products are you bringing to market? What communities are going to be impacted by your operations? And ESG priorities need to be geared to that. Now, am I allowed to plug something? We have a panel at 1:30 where we're exploring exactly this, to look at how can you look at ESG in a local context, and it specifically focuses on emerging markets. So you're all very welcome to come to that. 1:30, Palm Grove 1.
Thank you for the plug, Doug.
Sweet.
So FII is the largest, certainly the most significant investor conference in the global south, right? And Doug, you're in London. John, you're in Los Angeles. One of our deeply held beliefs is that we do have to widen the circle of conversation and become more inclusive about the viewpoints that matter, whether the topic is ESG or any other pressing concern. So Darren, I turn to you. Sustainability excellence might be the leading strategy consultant in this region around these matters. And so you have a particularly keen view on how, if at all, any of this resonates here in the GCC, in the Middle East, or in emerging markets more broadly. What are you thinking now? Is this backlash something that you think is something that will need to be taken seriously in the market? Does it really more reflect the political contexts of the US and Europe?
Well, I guess, first of all, thank you for having me here. I guess we look at it from first of all, the bigger picture. You know, and the bigger picture is that, you know, fundamentally, financial markets are misaligned with sustainable development. No. And this has been mentioned many times here, and the markets do not price in the Earth's ecological services. The markets don't price in climate change. They don't price in positive or negative social, environmental, and socioeconomic impacts. So there's a misalignment, and that's where ESG comes in. It's trying to be a solution to that, and investors are recognizing, and all other types of financial and other stakeholders, that we're going to need to have alignment. You can't continue to have misalignment, because it'll lead to an unsustainable future, and every transaction that happens now is taking us in the wrong direction. So how do we fix the markets? We look at ESG information, and we give that to different stakeholders to take action on, and we try to structurally fix markets at the same time. When it comes to emerging markets, you know, actually we see incredible possibility and potential in this context. Not all emerging markets are equal, but generally speaking, if you look at all the ESG indices that are out there, almost consistently they say that there's a positive correlation, you know, this was mentioned earlier, between companies that adopt sustainability and outperformance in the market. But the delta, the difference in emerging markets is even larger than it is in, let's say, Western markets. And there's many reasons for that, but one of them, just as an example, is, you know, if you have two businesses side by side that want to expand globally, and one of them is practicing ESG and one isn't, that one is going to be more successful in international markets that are asking for that. So there's a bigger outperform. So companies might say, well, you know, this is a Western market kind of thing. No, actually, the opportunity is even bigger in emerging markets. Yeah. I think also, you know, people say, well, they've been doing this for 20 years or 30 years. Well, and from that, you know, there's been lessons learned. So here you can really leapfrog. You can really say, well, let's say in the banking sector, what are the most critical competitiveness aspects that I need to put in place, you know, from a current financial markets point of view, and maximizing, you know, impact for the future. And I can just jump there a lot faster. So I can get to those competitive points faster. It might have taken a bank 20 years before. It could take them 6 months to start moving at a similar kind of, you know, progression now. The other possibility, again, not all emerging markets are created equal, but, you know, this region in particular, it's very exciting because you have things like the national vision, the Vision 2030. You heard all the senior people here talking about, you know, my job is to achieve the Vision 2030. These visions are sustainable development plans. They have economic, social, governance, socioeconomic, human capital components. So as a business, I should be in a strategically stronger position than my counterpart if, let's say, I'm competing for some kind of project or bid, and I have all of the main requirements, plus I can show how I'm meeting or exceeding all of the different Vision 2030 criteria. So actually, this is a great tool for competitive advantage in the local market and in other markets where they have those national visions. And you could say, from a broad point of view, the more that you encourage ESG in the market here, the faster it's a tool for getting to achievement of the Vision 2030 faster. Yeah. It will get you there faster. And the last comment I would just say, let's say in terms of opportunities, is, again, not all emerging markets are created equal, but in this region we have sovereign wealth funds. Yeah. And this is just an incredible possibility. Because if sovereign wealth funds are saying, well, these are financially material issues and they're going to shape our competitiveness, our national objectives and our international competitiveness, then we need to look at them. And as a case in point, there was a few years ago, 6 of the world's largest sovereign wealth funds created the One Planet Sovereign Wealth Fund framework. And this framework is saying climate change is financially material, so we need to think about how we want to respond to that. What do our portfolio companies need to think about? How do we want to invest going forward? How are we going to manage this transition? And come out still in a leading position. And 4 out of those 6 sovereign wealth funds were from the Gulf, from the GCC. And so then imagine if those sovereign wealth funds say, we want our businesses to take these risks and opportunities into consideration, and you move that portfolio, that's moving a huge percentage of the national market right there, just with that one intervention. So the possibilities are actually quite breathtaking in certain emerging markets.
Darren, thank you. And thank you for locating a view distinctly from the emerging markets, not just reflecting what's going on in the developed markets. I think that's a key element there. Laurie, let me turn to you. When I hear misalignment of markets, I think of investing opportunity. How are you feeling in your practice today about ESG as a tool for helping State Street do the best investing that it can? Is it still relevant for you, and has anything changed in your mindset?
Well, the thing that's constant, as one of the largest global asset managers, our primary responsibility is our fiduciary responsibility to deliver value to investors. And we've been on an ESG journey for many years, starting back really in the 70s and 80s with more investor-driven, socially responsible mandates, but more recently focusing on integrating ESG. There is informational value about a company's footprint in these ESG issues. And to the degree that you can understand what a company is doing and what kinds of risks it might be exposed to and how its management of those risks aligns with its long-term corporate strategy, you can actually capture value creation moments. And so through our indexing book, we're very much voting our shares on behalf of our investors, and we're focused on those things that we think are value accretive. So to the degree that boards are acting in their fiduciary capacity to hold management accountable around understanding ESG issues, whether they be governance related, whether they be human capital related, whether they be environmentally related, to the degree that they are really working with those managements to make sure that they're understanding and addressing those kinds of issues, we think that that's critically important. I think the second point that I would make is that different investors have different ambitions and intentions as it relates to ESG. So where we have the fiduciary and the discretionary responsibility, as I mentioned, the most important thing is the long-term value creation. But there is an array of investors, and it was hinted at earlier. There are some investors that are willing to forego certain investment outcomes to get the impact that they're actually driving towards. And that's perfectly within their remit if they're acting responsibly, but they're also aligning against their own intentions. So you need to have different tools that can let you navigate the different outcome that you're trying to accomplish. And so the ubiquity of data in and of itself is actually a positive thing because it lets investors pick and choose among those things that align with their value systems and their intentionality and be able to demonstrate that not only are they getting an investment performance outcome, but they're getting an ESG performance outcome. And then the last thing that I would say is that it is a very quickly evolving space, and we've heard some discussion about how it's even becoming politically evolving, which is not necessarily always constructive. But the thing that I would say is that there are many forces within the industry that are driving coalition. A lot of the NGOs, for example, are aligning around frameworks and even to some degree methodologies, and we think that's actually helpful because it lets companies navigate what's required to be reported, what investors want, how they can do that consistently. The area that still requires a fair amount of work, in our opinion, though, is the kind of broader regulatory framework. You've got lots of different jurisdictions that are going at this in different ways. It's creating complexity. Oftentimes, there might be a framework, but not a lot of guidance around methodology. And we're concerned at times that great will be the enemy of good enough, because what we really want to see is compliance by companies that do adopt certain metrics and report on those in a consistent fashion so that investors can make informed choices.
Thank you, Lori. Rebecca, one thing I'm hearing from Lori, ubiquity of data, complexity, and now we're adding controversy to an already fairly complex set of questions, certainly at scale with the large portfolios. What can we do to really make sense of this data and to make sure that whatever we call it, it's smart and we're on the right track and we're asking and answering the right questions about our investees?
Yeah, I completely agree with Lori that there is information in the sustainability data that the investors care about, and it depends on their objectives, as she said, and they have different objectives, right? And many investors might not care that much about any sustainability metrics, but others might, right? Depending on the type of investments they want to do. So the important thing is for them to have the right data, methodologies, or some kind of like a standardization of how to apply that data, but most importantly, the tools, like Lori said, and having the right information at the right time when they have to make the decision. Now, I agree with all the challenges that John pointed out, but we need to also acknowledge that it's a relatively nascent trend, right? The sustainability trend. The ESG framework started being used early 2000s, right? So it has been maybe 15 years or 20 years since the investors started using ESG frameworks. Now, the most important thing is how do we solve those challenges? And honestly, we hear a lot about the agreement and the correlation of ratings or not correlation, the methodologies that are being used and are popping up, and the confusion. But the reality is that the most important thing is having tools to apply whatever methodologies, right? There is no agreement today on many other financial metrics that we use every day, like GDP or inflation, and how countries calculate those numbers. And still, we all use those numbers every day, right? So even if it's complex to calculate certain metrics, we need to do it, and we need to incorporate those metrics. The same with the accounting systems, right? Everyone complains that there are different regulations being developed in Europe around sustainability, or in the US now with the SEC discussions, right, about what to do about sustainability. But it doesn't matter if they don't really agree on one methodology, right? As I said, the accounting system is also different. So it's more about having the right tools to apply whatever views the investors have to. And on that regard, as an entrepreneur, we focus on solutions, right? And we believe there is a very positive trend. There is more and more data being disclosed. To be clear, even if the companies don't disclose, the data can be estimated. So we don't really need, so the disclosure levels are increasing, but still there are estimated data that we can have. Methodologies, there is a certain standardization, so it's trending positively as well. And tools are more and more available for investors. So I guess I'm an optimist about this space, for sure.
Thank you, Rebecca. Let's turn to the exchanges. What I'm hearing is that there's smart ESG. If you work with Doug, Rebecca, and Darren, you're doing smart ESG. But I think, as this year has shown us, there's also what? Dumb ESG, let's call it that, where people are slapping the label on financial products that don't merit the label. And then you're going to be facing John in court. In this context, Lauren, I'll start with you. What can the exchanges do to help us guarantee that we've got credible, smart ESG products being traded and help us push back on whatever these concerns are around the misleading use of the label?
I think it's a terribly well-put question. There's a lot of controversy nowadays on greenwashing and labels about sustainable product, green financial product. What are they? So I think the first and foremost from the exchange operator's point of view is that we really need to have standardized requirements and harmonized standards and so on, so that we are all talking about the same thing. Now, I know that it is very difficult in this very diverse, complex, different part of the world, as well as different industries. There may be different standards, but what the exchange can require is clear and accountable disclosure. So for HKEX at the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, for example, we've been advocating the disclosure since 2017. And we have upgraded the requirement each state and make it clearer, and also helping the companies to comply. We have a ESG Academy online telling people, what to do. And I agree that the E and the S and the G has to be separated. And not all companies can satisfy a very big ESG requirement. Are we talking about the E or the S and the G? Some of the smaller companies listed on our exchange feel that they embrace the S and the G. The G in terms of governance, in terms of the company's own responsibility to its shareholder. Better requirement, better governance. Social, this particularly came out during the pandemic, how you take care of your employees, your stakeholders. Things like that, companies can digest, can understand, and can be measured, and investors can understand. So those are the more practical and at the micro level where people can put ESG into action. And then, of course, we have the larger issue on the environment. Now, there is a lot of talk about climate, and where the exchange can play a role is that in the transition from the fossil fuel to the renewable, and I think it will take time, and we cannot have, just stop fossil fuel right away. And the transition will rely on technology, whether it's, electric vehicle, whether it's solar, whether it is wind turbine. All these are available now, but they are still too expensive to be very popularly applied. So the transition to that, whether, China has made a commitment for 2060 to be net zero, and that's a long journey. That needs funding. Technology needs funding, and that's where the exchange can come in, the capital market can come in to play a role to help companies satisfy the E part of the ESG.
Khaled, does this resonate with you from your view from Saudi Arabia and the Saudi Arabia Exchange? What are you focused on in moving forward?
Well, as Laura said, and I agree with everything has been said on the discussion, as exchanges, we always think about how do we facilitate the practices between issuers, investors, financial intermediaries, etc. And honestly, when it comes to ESG, we find it a little bit very difficult. One angle, you look at it from a standard point of view. Corporates needs a very clear framework on how do they report and what do they report. And in the other side, investors, we see two groups where groups follow the standard issued by ESG rating agencies 100%, where other groups that have their own definition of what they focus on ESG on their investment responsibilities. And I'd like to also go back to John's points. The way I look at ESG, and I would agree with you, Laura, on the separation between the E, S, and G, but I'd like to illustrate it as a three-step ladder, where G as the first step, to me, it's more clearer than any of the other two letters, because mostly it's governed by regulations within capital market, and I'm specifically speaking about capital markets, or by guidelines of practices on the governance, even if it's outside the required governance. And if you go to the second step where social, it's becoming, the coverage of that letter is wider, where you go whether that within your own corporates or wider to your customers as well as your community. And here, the standard get a little bit vague and definitions varies among people. And it goes to And I would use the word worst when it goes to environments as the third letter, because it goes to an impact that your corporate will have on not only in your country, but even on your contribution on that impact to the planet. And as we evolve, I think not only a responsibility of both the investor and corporates on their impact on environment, for example, but we can see global cooperations between countries and even within their own jurisdictions and countries. And that will evolve, in my opinion, to even a more restricted regulatory framework around the environment. And I think you could argue with this is the right direction to go to framework environment and social, just like governance, or no, you want it to be, for a long-term perspective, as a mindset of accountability and responsibility to corporates. So it is an evolvement period for all of us, whether we are capital market investors or issuer, but I think it is a good subject to continue to think about, and I think there are a great deal of cooperations today.
John, how does this talk of shared responsibility resonate for you?
Well, I mean, obviously it's important, and there is a lot of laudable things associated with the ESG movement. No question about that. Who could quarrel with wanting to pursue social justice or being concerned about the environment and wanting to invest in a way that promotes those laudable goals? But surely there has to be a way to measure these things, right? And if you're an investor and you're trying to make decisions, shouldn't there be agreed metrics? Shouldn't there be a transparency and a comparability? So if I'm an investor, I know what I'm looking at when I'm comparing investments. So that's just what I'd suggest going forward to kind of bolster this movement, is to focus on trying to get some agreement, some transparency on what exactly we're trying to measure.
I think we're making some progress with John. I want to hear what the panelists have to say about the future of the acronym ESG. Are we going to be using these three letters to describe our thinking in this area 2 or 3 years down the line? Rebecca, you're shaking your head. What are you thinking?
No, I mean, I never liked the ESG framework, I have to say. It's a framework that was defined to assess risk linked to sustainability. And even in that case specifically, our view is that, as researchers as well in the topic, is that the risk factors need to be included separately, like specific metrics on specific topics. To be clear, I used to work in private equity, and we used social, like turnover of the employees was a metric that we were using like decades ago, right? But you use in a specific context of your model, right? So why would you need to take those metrics out and create a rating for that? So we never really liked the framework, to be honest. So hopefully we will move away from that and include risk at the metric level specifically. But of course, I agreed with John that we need better methodologies, standardized, certain level of standardization, but also freedom for investors to do what they want to do, right?
Thank you. Darren, what's the future of this acronym?
I don't know. I mean, I've seen so many iterations of it. I mean, going back to what I said at the beginning, we're trying to make financial markets align with sustainability. We absolutely need reliable, credible, comparable data that investors can use, and investors and different stakeholders will all have different opinions on it. I think we're moving in the right direction because the IFRS, which oversees the International Accounting Standards Board, has created the International Sustainability Standards Board. So now you're going to have, accounting and sustainability side by side, and ultimately it would be that these two come together, and everyone just is reporting on this set of metrics that include today's nascent ESG metrics, but basically work to align financial markets with sustainable development.
Thank you all. We are out of time. I want to thank these panelists. It was a fantastic discussion. There's more to come. John, we're going to continue to work on you. I promised an announcement. I've actually got 2 big announcements. The first one is we're getting really close to lunch. We will break for lunch right after my second big announcement, which I want you all to stay here. turn over here and look at this amazing technology, Konaku, that Ashagabi and his team have brought in. They brought them all the way from San Francisco. It's an advanced robotics system for detecting smells and solving a variety of health and safety issues. We're so excited to partner with them. They're going to be providing a demonstration. So let's give them a couple minutes of our time, and then I promise lunch will come, and we would ask everybody to think about coming back in here about 1:20 so we can kick off promptly at 1:30.